Hi.
Greetings. We are in the Pure Worship Book, page.
113 at the subheading Our Bones Are Dry, Our Hope Has Perished.
Yeah, and they're analyzing in this particular section Ezekiel 37. Interestingly, they only pick phrases from Ezekiel 37. This time it's not even a whole text, not even a whole verse sometimes.
Well,
It's a phrase here and there. So we want to read part of what they're referencing here because they tell you to read it.
mm-hmm.
We will obey. So I'm going to be reading from the screen and Vivian from the book, so excuse me if I look like I'm looking over your head. Here's the first two paragraphs. Our bones are dry and our hope has perished. Jehovah next revealed to Ezekiel how the vision was to be understood, saying, These bones are the whole house of Israel. Indeed, after the exiles had learned of Jerusalem's destruction, they felt that they were as good as dead. Therefore they lamented, Our bones are dry, and our hope has perished. We are completely cut off. Interestingly, that's exactly what the situation is according to the Watchtower. Their hope has been cut off, if you're an Israelite. Then in response to their lament, Jehovah revealed that this gloomy vision of bones actually contained a bright message of hope for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Then they tell you to read Ezekiel 37:12-14, which we'll do in a couple of minutes. Through this vision, Jehovah assured the exiles that he would bring them to life, lead them back to their land, and let them settle there. Moreover, Jehovah addressed them again as my people. How uplifting those words must have been for the despondent exiles. Why could they be certain that this promise of restoration would come true? Because Jehovah himself stood behind it. He declared, I myself, Jehovah, have spoken, and I have done it.
How had the ancient nation of Israel experienced the fulfillment of the gloomy part of this prophetic vision? The symbolic demise of Israel had already begun in 740 BCE with the fall and exile of the 10-tribe kingdom. Some 130 years later, when the people of Judah were also deported, the whole house of Israel was in captivity. Symbolically speaking, the whole group of exiles were then as dead as the bones seen in Ezekiel's vision. Also recall that Ezekiel saw not just bones, but very dry bones, which indicated that their death-like condition continued for a long time. And indeed, for Israel and Judah combined, it lasted over 200 years, from 740 to 537 BCE. Restoration prophecies concerning Israel, such as the ones spoken by Ezekiel, have a larger fulfillment. Just as the ancient nation of natural Israel was killed and remained symbolically dead for a considerable time, so the Israel of God, the anointed Christian congregation, was killed symbolically and experienced death-like captivity for a long time. And they referenced Galatians 6:16, the Israel of God. In fact, the captivity of the anointed congregation as a whole continued for so long that their spiritual condition could well be compared to that of bones that were very dry. As explained in the preceding chapter, the captivity of the anointed Christian congregation began in the 2nd century CE and lasted for many centuries, just as Jesus had indicated in his kingdom illustration of the wheat and the weeds, Matthew 13:24-30.
First, let's note the jumping around here. This is scriptural hopscotch.
Yeah.
Rather than deal with the text itself, which is give me a large chunk at least of Ezekiel 37. They pick a phrase like my people here, then jump to Galatians, jump to Matthew 13, jump to Jeremiah 50. All of this is typical of the approach that is so fatal to true Bible study.
Yeah.
So when you look at, for instance, the first two paragraphs, what do you have that we could object to right away? Well, not much, because after all, they say that this prophecy, Ezekiel 37, contains a bright message of hope for Israel.
Yeah.
We agree, it's for Israel.
It's addressed again as, they are addressed again as my people.
Yeah,
So,
my people.
That's true.
But put this in chronological context. They've been habitually unfaithful to God for about 1,000 years. Since they were in Egypt, 1,000 years before, they have been habitually worshiping false gods.
And during that time, he still calls them my people.
And he does continually through these restoration prophecies of his. They are still called his people, whether they're faithful or unfaithful.
Yeah.
That continuity you've lost completely here. By the time you get to the end of paragraph 7 here, you've already made the jump. How had the ancient nation of Israel experienced the fulfillment? Well, they've come back after 70 years. But somehow you jump to, that's no longer the case. By the time we get to paragraph 9, they're no longer his people. Now there's an Israel of God. What you're missing, of course, is the fact that the Israel of God, quote, yes, that's a verse. That's a phrase from a verse, Galatians 6:16. But even within Galatians and in the other 12 epistles of Paul, you kind of get the impression that what he means by that is the faithful remnant within Israel. In other words, they're still physical Israelites.
Yeah, and that's always the case. So I think you also jump to the conclusion that because they go back to the land, they're now alive, and while they were out, they were dead.
Yeah.
But that's not. It's. I think it's because witnesses have an idea of death different than anybody else does.
Well, not different than other cultists.
Yeah.
But Christians believe that death is first of all spiritual death, then it is physical death. You just assume it's always physical death.
Yeah.
Then you have to make it into symbolic death or death-like. What's the phrase they use here?
Condition.
The death-like condition. It's not death-like. It is death.
Yeah.
We'll put in a link at the end that shows you what the first reference to death indicates about the nature of death in Genesis chapter 2 and 3.
Yeah. And I mean, Paul, he talks about people as if they're the walking dead until they become believers.
This is right. So the death-like existence you're talking about, because you're talking about a prophecy about bones after all, this is not spiritual life in the future for 144,000. This is a resurrection-like experience, and it involves a physical resurrection as well as a physical restoration of Israel. Mm-hmm. That's all missed here. So I think what we have to deal with is their definition of death is wrong, their definition of Israel is wrong, and because they don't quote from the actual text, they don't look at the actual text, they don't see what's wrong. It's very clear in the text itself. Even the 3 verses they've just selected here they are. That's Ezekiel 37:12-14. This is the ESV. Therefore prophesy and say to them, who's them, of course, the people who are Israelites living in the land. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people. Now at this point they're living in exile. So of course they've lost their hope. Notice that, O my people. So even though you call them spiritually dead, they're still his people. And I will bring you into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am Yahweh, Lord, when I open your graves and raise you from your graves. So somehow built into this is both the symbolic resurrection, i.e. restoration, but also physical resurrection. Mm-hmm. So that's the way Israel took these texts originally, that they have at least a clear reference to the nature of the future life having to do with the physical body. Again, I will raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will put my spirit within you. And there's the missing component here from this idea that you are somehow fulfilling this.
It's your faithfulness that somehow gets you in right with God suddenly. Whereas it's about God and him saying, I'm going to do this.
You will have to experience a rebirth, which is a real rebirth, i.e. I will put my spirit within you. Where's that in the hope of Jehovah's Witnesses? They say that's only for the 144,000. and you shall live. That's very clear then, that without that you will not live. And I will place you in your own land. What's that got to do with Jehovah's Witnesses? Then you shall know that I am Yahweh, the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it. That part you did quote, but out of context. It's about a people who will have to experience a spiritual rebirth, i.e. my spirit within you, and you will return to your land. So a physical restoration and a spiritual rebirth.
But it takes an act of God. You know, you're not actively a part of your birth, either physically or when it comes to your belief in God. It's an act of God.
Then at the very end of this, they jump to Matthew 13. That's fatal to their argument. Why are we going here to somehow make a parallel between the exiles, which is, after all, 70 years for the people of Judah that Ezekiel is addressing, and we're making that somehow a larger fulfillment that involves an 1800-year death-like condition of Christendom? Well, where do they get that? Well, they only cite one text here.
Because they believe in the apostasy happening right then.
Yeah. We challenge anyone who doubts what we're saying in terms of the absolutely impossibility that a 70-year exile of Israel becomes somehow a type of an 18th century death of Christ's congregation. Just read Matthew 13, from which they get the argument about the wheat and the weeds growing together.
Just like with Israel, there was always some faithful Jews, faithful Israelites. Same with the church. There's always been a remnant of faithful people.
Yeah.
In that sense, the weeds don't take over. It's not just all weeds.
Although at certain times in history, as in Israel, the weeds seem to dominate, but the faithful remnant, God keeps raising them up. Remember when Elijah thought that he was alone? God had to say to him, no, there's 7,000 who haven't yet bowed the knee to Baal. That's not just an accident. God is doing that. God is raising these individuals up, sometimes completely unknown to each other. So there's no organization within God's organization. No, he raises up individuals. That's the way he's always done it. What are the links, by the way, we're putting in?
We have two links. One is why JW.org will fall, yet the church stand. Watchtower myth, Christendom apostate. And the second one is what JW.org is not telling you about death. What did die mean in Genesis chapter 2?
Yeah, we'll put both those videos on your screen, but we won't put the playlist on. But look at those two playlists when you have time. What JW.org is not telling you, and why JW.org will fall and the church will stand. There's a lot of really good stuff. Most of it recorded, by the way, 4 or 5 years ago. So chances are pretty good you haven't seen a lot of them.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Bye.